So today we're going to talk about which other cars a Thar Roxx buyer could or should consider before making their decision. And you know what? It's going to be a nice wide range, as you've already seen with that little glimpse. But before we launch into that, let me give you a tiny bit of a history lesson. Recent history, don't worry. We're going back to 2020 when the Thar first launched as a three-door. It was only a four-wheel drive, but everyone got damn excited because you had a slightly more refined, almost, let's say, logical choice for a butch SUV. It was a lifestyle choice. It wasn't really about off-roading for a lot of those buyers, but it kept a lot of buyers away, which is why a year and a half later, Mahindra launched the rear-wheel drive version of the three-door Thar. And then began the clamor for the five-door. It took its time coming to us, all that talk about the Wrangler in between, and now we finally have it. And so, the conversation becomes a lot wider and a lot more relevant to a lot more people with this car. For many, the Thar and now the Thar Roxx is a car that they don't need for sure, but they still probably want one anyway. It's got that allure, that hook, and that appeal. And the Roxx will likely convert people who sat on the fence about buying the three-door Thar. Alright, so let's get down to it. Now, when the three-door launched, you could call it a subcompact SUV, but not too many people were really comparing it to the Venues and the Sonnets. But when this car arrived, you started to make comparisons to all compact SUVs. All compact SUVs are represented by this car because it is the outright best seller. But of course, when I say Creta, I'm also including so many of the others. That is a crowded segment, and which is why this becomes interesting, because the three-door was never really as sophisticated, never really as feature-laden as those other rivals or potential rivals. So you bought that car for that car. But now, when you think about things like ADAS, you think about virtual cluster, you think about all kinds of things, panoramic sunroof, 6 airbags, all of that is there on this car, just like it is on this segment benchmark. So the conversation starts to become a lot more relevant to all of these really loaded SUVs, crossovers, soft roaders. And that's why I think a lot of people who are buying a Thar Roxx, or let me flip it around, people who are buying a Creta or a Seltos or any of these cars would also now be compelled to think about the Thar Roxx. The compact SUV has slowed its growth just a little bit of late, but remains the segment that reflects the aspiration of the middle class. Cars like the Creta and Seltos that I mentioned have spoilt the buyer, pampered them with design, comfort, and tech. And not just that, within the segment you have plenty of engine and gearbox options. Apart from the standard petrol, turbo petrol, and diesel, you also get CNG and hybrid powertrains. So there's one for everyone, and many transmissions too. The Creta and many other compact SUVs are loaded with features: large touchscreens, virtual instrument clusters, panoramic sunroofs, ventilated seats, and yes, ADAS. The Creta and its cousin lead that charge with the maximum features. So, features are a key reason why the Creta is so popular, with Hyundai selling 15,000 units or more every month. But it also drives well. But I'll get to that. Alright, so there are some people who'll want to buy the Thar Roxx, who'll just want to buy that. So let's forget about them for a second. The others, like I said, will definitely consider options across this compact SUV space, because that is where the Thar Roxx has now plonked itself. But there's one other buyer that's also going to consider this car, and that is the one I'm talking about. This bestseller, also from Mahindra, the Scorpio N, is definitely going to be one of the cars where people who are already thinking of buying one of these will get compelled to also now think about this one. It's something for sure, this cannibalism aspect, that the guys at Mahindra would have thought about while pricing the Thar Roxx. Look, it's not like the Scorpio N isn't feature loaded, but the Thar Roxx does have a larger 10.25-inch touchscreen, virtual instrument cluster, larger sunroof, and a lot more tech and features. The Scorpio N does still get a lot though that its predecessor never did. Even though all this is optional, it has the Adrenox infotainment suite, 6 airbags, ventilated seats, and wireless phone charger too. The Big Daddy scores on big space, especially with its third row, and you can get it in 6 or 7-seater configurations with either a bench or captain seats in row 2. Okay, now let's drive all of these. I will start with the Big Daddy. To a traditional Scorpio buyer, the Scorpio N was like a massive revolutionary jump. The car handles much nicer. Body roll is there, but it's not as pronounced as before. And it's so smooth and refined by comparison. The whole experience is a lot nicer, but the car feels tall, it feels exaggeratedly SUV-like, and that may not be everybody's cup of tea. It may not also be what a lot of buyers are necessarily looking for. Interestingly enough, this car also gets the power driver's seat. It still gets a fair number of bells and whistles, but when it comes to being tech heavy, this isn't that car for you. And it's also the image, right? Like a Scorpio doesn't come with the sophistication that a lot of urban buyers might be looking for. The Scorpio N has either a 2-liter turbo petrol or a 2.2-liter turbo diesel engine. And like the Roxx, this also gets a choice of a 6-speed manual and a 6-speed automatic. And also like that, the 4x4 is just on the diesel. Now, the Creta. So there's no doubt about it. Instantly, this is just the more comfortable, more sorted out car because driving position, the seat comfort itself, the steering, the ride quality, all of that just ticks a lot of boxes, which is of course the reason why the Creta is so popular, and it holds on to that. If that's what you're looking for, it's really a bit of a no-brainer. The other nice thing about the Creta, it's just loaded. I mean, you've got a lot of variants and a lot of them are pretty well loaded, including things at the top end like a power-adjusted driver's seat. Just makes life a little bit easier. And if you have the budget, why not? And the Creta's other huge advantage, it's massive. Lots of different engines, lots of different transmission options. Many drivetrain options, and there's rumored to be a CNG on the way too. While there's no longer an IMT gearbox, it does have a 6-speed manual and 3 automatic options depending on the engine type. 6-speed torque converter automatic, 7-speed dual clutch, or the CVT. Now the car with the buzz, the Thar Roxx. The first thing that strikes you about the cabin of the Thar Roxx, even before you start driving, is the color. Everybody's been talking about how impractical it is, and yes, it isn't going to age well because it's going to get super dirty. It's going to be quite a challenge to keep it clean. The word refinement is not quite what you would think about, or not the first thing anyway, when you think about a car like the Thar, and I think that's the part that surprised many people. There is a body roll, there's a pretty significant bounce, but the seat comfort, the ergonomics, the seating angle, also the seat height and the commanding view of the road, it really redeems itself with all of that. And so it's a good balance between the brutish SUV, that is the Scorpio N, and the comfortable one, that is, of course, the Creta. It shares its engines with the smaller Thar, and even if the 3-door Thar ends up getting many of the Roxx's new features, the 5-door variant will remain a compelling option for family buyers and more. The level of equipment is pretty staggering, and I think that's the thing that also gets you to start thinking about the value for money angle with this car. I mean, at the top end, you get literally everything you can think of, from driver assistance systems to blind spot cameras, 360 camera, and even the connected car experience. The only question is that when it comes to all of these electronics and gadgets, is it as refined as the Hyundai Kia family? Yes, Mahindra has a lot to prove over electronics and quality of some of that equipment, but the good news is that it will only get better. Now let's look at pricing, and this is when you start to realize why the buyer is going to be so confused between these three. The Creta is the most compact but is big on features and refinement. It does well on safety too now, with more standard safety gear. Despite the larger size, more seats, and with decent tech, the Scorpio N isn't that much more expensive compared to the other two, and it'll also have to compete with the Hyundai Alcazar now. The Thar Roxx could have been cheaper, but Mahindra wanted to limit the impact on its stablemates, especially the 3-door Thar and even the 3XO. This was never a fair fight, and hence wasn't really a comparison. It was about perspective and understanding where the Thar Roxx, as the latest entrant, might score. And the Mahindra cars are connected but still missing things like Apple CarPlay, which remains a promised item. So bottom line, the thing you realize is that Mahindra has played it really smart. Yes, the Thar Roxx will cannibalize pretty much half of its portfolio. Even the 3XO, definitely the Scorpio N, and even the 3-door. Of course, let's not forget that. But so what? It still gains a whole host of buyers who may have sat on the fence, who may now be more convinced. And it's like the old Maruti game. Have lots of cars, different price points, they overlap, but they appeal to every kind of consumer. And that's probably what's going to really make this car rocks. Given the Maruti Suzuki Jimny's recent comeback to the market after a significant price drop, should the Koreans be thinking about a lifestyle-oriented compact SUV that sits apart from their volume drivers? Maybe. For now, tell us, if you had to buy, which one would you choose?